You don't tame a continent. You survive it. And for 10,000 years, one animal did exactly that. In numbers so vast, they darkened the horizon, shook the earth beneath your feet, and defined an entire landscape. Then we almost erased them entirely. This is the American bison. Bison. The heaviest land animal in North America. A symbol of wildness, resilience, and one of the most dramatic conservation comebacks in the history of this country. And there is far more to this animal than the postcard image suggests. The numbers alone are staggering. A mature bull bison stands 6 feet tall at the shoulder and can weigh up to 2,000 pounds. According to National Geographic, the bison are capable of running at speeds up to 35 miles per hour, faster than a horse over short distances, and can pivot and change direction with shocking agility for an animal of their size. They can jump 6 feet vertically from a standing position. Let that sink in. 2,000 pounds. Off the ground. Vertical. But the architecture of the bison is what sets it apart from every other large mammal on the continent. That massive hump rising above the shoulders is not fat. It is a mountain of muscle and elongated vertebrae, a biological crane system that powers the bison's most essential winter survival tool, its head. Bison sweep snow from the ground, using powerful side-to-side sweeps of their enormous skull, excavating frozen grass buried beneath 2 feet of snowpack that would starve any other grazer. Their skull itself is a battering ram, thick, dense bone fused into a weapon capable of absorbing and delivering impacts that would shatter the skull of almost any other animal. Bull bison fights are not sparring matches. They are full-speed collisions between two animals collectively weighing 3 tons, heard from over a mile away. The bison's coat is a study in biological engineering. The front third of the animal, head, hump, and forequarters, is covered in a thick, woolly mat of insulating fiber, so dense that ice forms on its surface without penetrating to the skin in temperatures of -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The hindquarters carry a shorter, lighter coat. The animal is, effectively, wearing a built-in parka. Heavier where the wind hits hardest, lighter where movement demands it. To understand the bison, you have to understand scale. Before European settlement, an estimated 30 to 60 million bison roamed North America, according to the Wildlife Conservation Society. They ranged from Alaska to northern Mexico, from the Rocky Mountains to the eastern seaboard, the Great Plains, that vast wind-swept interior of the continent, was their kingdom. Herds were not measured in hundreds. They were measured in miles. Early European explorers recorded accounts of bison herds so large they took 3 days to pass a single point. The ground trembled. The dust clouds were visible from miles away. Entire river crossings were blocked for hours as tens of thousands of animals moved like a single living river across the landscape. The bison did not simply live on the Great Plains. They built it. Their grazing, wallowing, and movement patterns shaped the grass composition, soil structure, and water distribution of an ecosystem stretching across 1 million square miles. Prairie dog towns thrived in bison-grazed shortgrass areas. Migratory birds followed the herds. Wolves, grizzlies, and mountain lions tracked their movements across seasons. The bison was the keystone on which an entire continental ecosystem balanced. Remove the bison, and the plains begin to fall apart. Long before any conservation biologist studied the bison, the indigenous nations of the Great Plains had built entire civilizations around it. For the Lakota, Comanche, Blackfoot, Cheyenne, and dozens of other nations, the bison was not simply a food source. It was the foundation of existence. Every part of the animal was used. The meat fed entire communities through brutal winters, and the hide became clothing, teepee covers, shields, and moccasins. The bones became tools, knives, needles, sleds. The sinew became bowstrings and thread. the stomach became a cooking vessel. The dried dung, called buffalo chips, became fuel on a treeless prairie. The relationship between the Plains nations and the bison was so complete, so intricately woven into culture, spirituality, and survival, that the near extinction of the bison in the late 19th century was not just an ecological catastrophe. It was a deliberate act of cultural destruction, and the people who understood that best were the ones who lived it. What happened to the American bison between 1870 and 1890 is one of the most staggering acts of mass wildlife destruction in recorded human history. In just 20 years, the population of 30 to 60 million animals was reduced to fewer than 1,000. The killing was industrial, systematic, and in many cases explicitly encouraged by the United States government as a strategy to undermine the Plains nations by destroying their primary food source. General Philip Sheridan reportedly told the Texas legislature in 1875 that bison hunters were doing more to solve the so-called Indian problem than the entire U.S. Army. Hide hunters moved across the plains in organized teams. A single skilled rifleman could kill 100 bison in a single day. The hides were shipped east by the millions. The carcasses, the meat, the bones, the organs, were left to rot across the prairie in piles stretching beyond the horizon. By 1889, as the Smithsonian Institution's William Hornaday conducted a survey of the entire United States and found fewer than 1,100 bison remaining on the continent, a species that had numbered in the tens of millions, gone in 2 decades. And yet, the bison did not disappear. What followed is a story that every American should know, because it is one of the earliest and most consequential conservation efforts in the nation's history. In 1905, a group of conservationists, including President Theodore Roosevelt, founded the American Bison Society, dedicated to preventing the total extinction of the species. Captive herds, maintained by a handful of ranchers and zoological parks who had quietly protected small groups of animals during the slaughter years, became the seed stock for recovery. Bison were reintroduced to protected federal lands. Our Yellowstone National Park, which had maintained a small wild herd continuously through the slaughter years, became the genetic anchor of the recovery effort. According to the Wildlife Conservation Society, the bison population in North America today stands at approximately 500,000 animals, with around 30,000 considered wild or conservation herds managed for ecological purposes. The rest are managed on private ranches, primarily for meat production. It is an extraordinary recovery. From fewer than 1,000 to 500,000 in just over a century. But the story is more complicated than that number suggests. Modern bison research is revealing just how essential this animal remains to the health of the Great Plains ecosystem. At the Nature Conservancy's Tallgrass Prairie Preserve in Oklahoma, one of the largest protected prairies in North America, researchers have spent decades studying the impact of bison reintroduction on grassland health. Their findings are clear. Bison grazing creates a patchwork of short and tall grass that supports dramatically higher levels of bird diversity, insect populations, and plant species richness than cattle-grazed or ungrazed land. Bison wallows, shallow depressions created when bison roll in dry soil to coat themselves in dust, fill with water after rain, and create microhabitats for amphibians, invertebrates, and migratory waterfowl. A single large prairie can contain thousands of these wallows, collectively functioning as a distributed wetland system. Bison dung fertilizes the soil with a different nutrient profile than cattle, supporting different microbial communities that improve soil carbon sequestration, a finding with direct implications for climate research. According to a 2019 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, restoring bison to even a fraction of their historic range could sequester millions of tons of carbon annually. making the recovery of this species not just an ecological goal, but a potential climate strategy. The bison is not a relic, it is a solution. But the road ahead for the bison is not without obstacles. The genetic diversity of the entire species was compressed through a bottleneck of fewer than 1,000 animals in the 1880s. Many conservation herds today carry cattle DNA from historical crossbreeding experiments. According to the American Bison Society's 2010 restoration plan, fewer than 20,000 bison exist in herds that are both genetically pure and managed for conservation rather than commercial purposes. Land remains the central challenge. Bison require vast space. A single healthy herd needs thousands of acres to exhibit natural migratory and grazing behavior. On a continent carved into private parcels and agricultural land, finding and protecting that space is a political and economic challenge as much as a biological one. Tribal nations are leading some of the most important work. The Intertribal Buffalo Council, a coalition of over 80 federally recognized tribes, manages more than 20,000 bison across tribal lands and is actively working to restore the cultural, ecological, and spiritual relationship between their communities and the animal that sustained them for millennia. For many indigenous nations, the return of the bison is not a conservation project. It is a healing. There is one place in America where bison have roamed continuously, wild and unmanaged, since prehistoric times: Yellowstone National Park. The Yellowstone herd, numbering approximately 5,000 animals, is the largest wild bison population in the United States, and the only herd that has never been extirpated from its historic range. They carry genetic diversity lost in every other herd. They exhibit natural behaviors: migration, predator response, social structure, that managed herds often cannot. And they are controversial. When Yellowstone bison migrate outside park boundaries in winter, following ancient routes onto lower elevation land in Montana, they are met with a politically charged management conflict involving ranchers, state agencies, and federal managers. Thousands of bison have been captured and slaughtered over the years due to concerns, disputed by some scientists, about bison transmitting the disease brucellosis to cattle. It is a conflict that puts conservation science, agricultural economics, and indigenous treaty rights into direct collision. And it remains unresolved. The bison at Yellowstone are wild, magnificent, and caught between a world that made them and a world that is still deciding what to do with them. In 2016, President Barack Obama signed the National Bison Legacy Act, making the American bison the official national mammal of the United States. The first new national symbol since the bald eagle was designated in 1782. It was a recognition long overdue. The bison shaped this continent. It fed civilizations, drove ecosystems, inspired art and ceremony, and survived a near extinction that should have been the end. It is woven into the American flag of every state that carries its image: Kansas, Wyoming, Oklahoma. It stares back from the U.S. nickel. It anchors the seal of the Department of the Interior. And on the windswept grasslands of the Dakotas, Montana, Oklahoma, and a dozen tribal nations, it still runs, still wallows, still locks horns in thunderous battles that shake the ground, still defining the land it walks on. America has many symbols, but none of them were here before the people. And none of them built the landscape we inherited. None of them came back from the edge of oblivion and kept running. The bison is not a symbol of what America was. It is a test of what America chooses to be. Do we have enough land left for wildness? Enough will to protect what we nearly destroyed? Enough humility to let something this powerful exist on its own terms? The bison does not wait for our answer. It lowers its head into the wind, sweeps the snow aside with that massive ancient skull, finds the grass beneath, and keeps going, the way it always has, the way it always will, if we let it.